Many of you will have your project update for the service learning project you're working on. And then we're going to have a discussion on externalities. I think that plays a lot into acknowledging land and, as Greg talked about, acknowledging responsibility that goes with that. We then at 11 o'clock are going to have a really special guest speaker, a social entrepreneur. He was recognized by Time Magazine as creating one of the top 100 inventions of 2020 with Breathe 99. And then we will break from there. As usual, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in or speak up at any time. But I will start. Does anyone, student organizations, any updates this week?
Yeah, we've got 2 for Net Impact. This upcoming Wednesday, we are doing a consulting prep meeting. So we're bringing in coaches from the Carlson case team. We're bringing their coaches just to work us through how you approach a case and how you actually work through a case. We're going to be using a nonprofit case, so kind of applicable to this class. And then on Thursday, we are going to be screening a documentary that Patagonia released that covers just the fight for America's public land. So I can drop both of those links in the chat, but see you there.
I love it. Thank you. Any other updates? All right, perfect. And so it is incredible to think that we are in March right now, looking at the rest of this month and next month for the semester. And so in terms of the flow for class, you will continue to have time on Thursdays to be working with your group to solidify your projects. Each of you have completed your both your individual research and project plans. And so that's not to say that you won't continue to have some conversations with new stakeholders and gaining more research or iterating somewhat what that project plan looks like. But what it does mean over these next 6 to 8 weeks, you really want to be focused on delivering and executing the milestones you've set out for yourself. So we've, we'll be working on the back end with each of your teams to make sure that they are available to attend that final class presentation. So those will be set on the Tuesday and the Thursday and then the Tuesday of that final week. So I believe that's the 22nd of April or the 27th. If any student group, if you are unable for whatever reason to participate in one of those days, please be letting me know. Otherwise, we're planning on working with your key contacts and other board and leadership of your organizations based on their availability. And so half of you will present on the Tuesday, half will present on Thursday. In terms of project updates, we'll talk about that. You can expect the research and project plans. Those will be graded by the end of this week. If you have any questions on grades or rationale, please let me know. But with that, we do have 2 presentations today. I will hand it over and stop sharing and then hit participant share if one of you would like to present first.
I'm happy to go first.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you guys able to see my screen and hear me all right? Okay, great. So the initiative that I went with is Raise Minnesota. So we're going to look at what is Raise's mission, who's their audience and how they're sustaining, and then what they can do moving forward to improve from where they are right now. So a little history into who they are. Founded in 2017, it's a Give Minnesota, which is another platform, another organization. It's one of their initiatives. And as I'll touch on in the next slide, it's kind of prompted through their intuition and recognition of a gap in reliable, sustainable fundraising for nonprofits. And so this led to the campaign in 2017 called Raise Minnesota. So their mission is to build lasting fundraising strategy and infrastructure for nonprofits. And so, as I mentioned, it was prompted by Give Minnesota after they asked questions around the hypothesis that they had come up with as a team, being that there's a critical gap in fundraising strategies and infrastructure among small to medium-sized nonprofits. So here's a tidbit from their website, and I'll just read the first sentence, but I think it's pretty critical to who they are. It says a lot about them as an organization. It says, "We coach fundraisers rather than simply taking on the project ourselves because it helps build an ecosystem of empowered, strong, relational professionals." And so I think, in a typical series of investing or with VC firms, a lot of it's about profitability and capital and just doing things pretty quickly. And for Raise Minnesota, I think a lot of their focus is on creating sustainability with these nonprofits, and in hopes that they can work on their own long after they work with Raise, which is a very cool initiative. So they do so with local nonprofits or relatively local, and those that are in need of fundraising, dependent on a singular staff or small donor population. And they do this through consultation meetings, and it does cost money to meet with them. Now, their financials haven't been readily available to me yet, so I'm working on that. But my assumption is a lot of their revenue is created through these meetings and billing of clients. And so they continue to add team members and clients and grow in that regard. So where they are now, they started actually as one cohort working with roughly 5 clients in 2017, and they've continued to grow. So they've expanded to 2 cohorts working with about 15, and they've had a limited scope as they work to scale these programs. And so where they want to be looking at continued growth would be making the leap from 15 to 30 clients. They made it from 5 to 15, and so I'd like to see continued growth in that regard, and then continuing to expand the scope and continuing to scale as well as they grow. And I just think it's a really cool initiative. I know for my group personally, we're working on creating an earned revenue stream for the Friends of the Gong Road, and so it's obviously a really prevalent issue is fundraising and the financials of nonprofits. And so I think it's so cool that they're working to help sustain these programs that are doing good in the world. And yeah, it's just a kind of a different perspective on the whole fundraising and that side of nonprofits. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nolan. I think, many of you may recall when Give MN just started not that long ago, and it quickly really grew to be an outlet. And as you talked about from a sustainability standpoint, a revenue opportunity that organizations planned and they utilized. Would be curious, Nolan, for those 15 that are in that cohort, is there any relationship between Give MN or is Raise MN essentially operating as a separate entity today?
That's a really good question. I'm not honestly sure off the top of my head if there is any relation, but I can look into that and get back to you.
Yeah, I see Raise MN being a really good example of utilizing the IP, or utilizing what do organizations already do well and creating that earned revenue opportunity. And excited to hear about sustainability for those organizations. All right, we have one more presentation.
That's me. Okay, does that look all right? I'll do present. Beautiful. Okay, so I am going to be talking to you guys about Janita's Jar. And on the right side of my screen here, I have a picture of the founder. Her name is Janita Flowers, and she started this organization. So it's a cookie company, and she started this organization because she was a victim of domestic violence. And when she was going through her struggles with that, she found that baking was a really good escape, and that it also was a really good platform for starting conversations about what she was going through. Like, she would bake her cookies and then go see her friends and share them and talk about what was happening. And reflecting on it, she also remembered that growing up, being in the kitchen, which is a really good place for conversations between her and her family. So she wanted to start Janita's Jar as a way of just kind of having a platform to have these conversations, to bring awareness to the topic of domestic violence as someone that's gone through it herself, and to also diminish the feelings of isolation for other people going through it. And then overall, just to spark hope for those going through it as well. And I got to speak with Janita last Wednesday. We did a video call, and it was just so fascinating to speak with her and hear about her whole story and how she got Janita's Jar going. So I took this little excerpt from their website because I feel like it summed up what she's trying to do really well. So it says, building upon the rich traditions of using food as a tool to connect and engage, our goal is to reduce the shame, isolation, and loneliness that is experienced by victims of relationship violence through the powerful connection that is shared in conversation and community. So I feel like I couldn't have summed it up better myself. So I wanted to add that quote in there. And so they are sales based, like all of their money comes through the revenue from their cookies. But at the end of the day, Janita was telling me that the philanthropic part of Janita's Jar is the most important to her. But it's kind of a weird balance because she knows that in order to sustain her mission, she has to make sales because she donates profits from her cookies to other local organizations that help victims of domestic violence or just bring awareness to it. And she also does this thing called a conversation series where she like goes out, brings her cookies to like maybe a fraternity or a corporate office, and she speaks on her experience. So she was talking about how it's a weird place to be as a social enterprise because she has to drive for sales, even though that's not what she's really there for at the end of the day. And then we had a conversation about how, 2020 affected her, and it was almost devastating for her business because a lot of her clients were corporate offices. So she had to really quickly innovate to try and find a way to boost her online sales because she needed to keep sales going in order to keep her mission going at the end of the day. And then the submission one more time is just opening the floor for conversation. And hope is really what it's all about. That's what she kept driving home to me in our conversation. And she is trying to like spread hope through a kind of a variety of platforms. So one is the packaging. I know you can't really see that photo well, but like everything about the packaging on her cookies is trying to bring awareness. Like purple is the color for domestic violence. She has a QR code here, which links to a TED Talk she did, her own story here. And then, as I mentioned, she donates some of her profits from the cookies to other initiatives that help victims. And then she has that conversation series, or when she could do it, COVID kind of put a damper on that. But just going out and spreading her story is a really big part of spreading hope. And she was really cute. I don't know if you can see my camera or just looking at my screen, but she even sent me cookies after a conversation. So I had a really great time doing this presentation. I would have loved to talk to you guys more about it. I'm not going to play this for the sake of time, but she does have a TED Talk if you guys are interested in hearing more about her story and her company. So that's all I've got.
I like it. Thank you, Hannah. And feel free to put that link in the chat bar. Would also be curious, as you talked about the conversation series, did she mention at all in terms of utilizing, web or having virtual conversations, or is that something that she's paused during COVID?
Yeah, that's a really good question. She has not done too many virtual sessions. With COVID, she just tried to find a way to get her online presence really going and trying to find new customer markets for herself. So that's kind of been halted, but just like pushing sales has really been where she can focus herself right now.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. And with that, we are going to continue on. Many of you have project updates that will be due at the end of the day, Thursday. And so I have this listed for each group project updates. You can also now see if you go onto Canvas and go under our syllabus. So just that, click Canvas, click syllabus, and scroll down to the component of the service learning project. It should share the day you signed up for. So we have 7 of you that are going to be this Thursday, and then next Thursday, 7 more. If any of those dates look wrong, please let me know. But in terms of what is due for that component of the assignment, I'll go back to sharing this screen. The intent is that it'll be just a short written submission. Think of this as a memo for a job, an internship, a full-time project that you're working on and your boss is asking for an update. So if you go on Canvas, you'll see these questions that'll be part of the prompt, really asking what's happened since we last spoke. I included an example from last semester. And so, you know, it does not need to be multiple pages. It really is meant to be half a page to 1 page, just providing an update of key changes, both on what you're working on. And there is no formal presentation component. It's just that written submission. And then the goal for those of you that are submitting on the 18th or 25th, you are submitting the second memo, think of it, following those that are submitting this Thursday. So if I am due this Thursday, I'm not only submitting on Canvas, but then I'm sending that summary out to my team. Everyone should be on the same page and where the project is at, but it's also a chance that then you know, you're building on what your past teammates have described. Any questions on that component of the assignment?
So it looked like it's just supposed to be like 1 page, maybe a page and a half, something like that.
I would say, yeah, less than a page, between half a page and 1 page. It's really meant to be focusing in on what changes have been made since the previous submission. And so that could be stakeholders that you've talked to, whether it's milestones that you've hit, or you know, what you're planning to work on in the next few weeks. Any other questions? All right, so I want to talk about externalities today. We heard about it a little bit last Tuesday when Tim Roman with Ecotone spoke to us and really talked about this idea of incorporating externalities. We've heard this term now a few times throughout the semester, but I included kind of a definition at length here on the left. And what it really is external cost or benefit that's not reflected in that final cost of whether it's a good or service. And you'll often hear the term tragedy at the commons. And what it's talking about is the fact that we're not incorporating and taking ownership for those costs. How many of you, I'm gonna unshare my screen for a sec. How many of you have heard the term tragedy at the commons? What type of classes have you heard that in?
I've heard it in like sustainability classes.
Any other examples?
Econ.
It's something that I think we see more often, less talked about in business and more about science, economics. And it's really important because oftentimes when we're getting frustrated at business that things are being done unethically, it really comes down to the fact that they are not incorporating, or they are not pressured into incorporating these external costs that essentially they're taking advantage of, or externalities that are ultimately doing harm to all. When we talk about tragedy at the commons, a typical example is overfishing. And it's something that if there's no clear ownership of whose responsibility is it, then we are all going to maximize the the output of the resource that we have available to us. So I do want to spend a few minutes. We'll go into breakout rooms, and I'd just like you to spend a few minutes talking about what examples of externalities have you seen in your own lives? And then once you have 3 or 4 examples, talk about not only why is it important for us to address those, but how could we address those? What are potential ways that we could be addressing those. Most often it's very complicated, and that's one of the reasons why I don't think you see more progress in some of these very complicated examples. Are there any questions before we go into breakout rooms? All right, I am going to set those now. And I will see you back in about 10 minutes. So Greg, Leah, and myself had a discussion, I think, just alongside as you were talking about. We want to start by talking about what are examples of externalities. I'm not filling this list, so I will let whoever would like to go first.
Absolutely. Let me go first. So, as I mentioned about to my group about a class that I'm in called Ecology and Society, I was just learning about externalities in the lecture this morning that I was watching. So a positive externality that I can think of is like when a farmer plants a field of like flowers or crops, and like bees and birds come through, and like the birds pick up seeds and then they go and like litter the seeds around the rest of the environment, and then it creates more plants, or like the bees will come through and pollinate, and then more flowers will grow.
I love it. I would say I'm an optimist, but in externalities, I too typically am all doom and gloom. But yeah, there are a lot of examples of positive externalities. Our ecosystem naturally is a very positive externality. R&D, when you're doing research and development, vaccinations are a positive externality that not only are benefiting, yourself, they're actually benefiting others by having more people conducting these type of activities. So I should not limit it to just negative externalities, but what other examples of externalities were discussed?
Another kind of way to look at externalities on a more individual way would be looking at your individual purchases as a consumer, because every time you purchase something, you are contributing to the demand of that product. So that's why a lot of people go vegan, so that they remove the negative externality of adding to the demand of animal products. And also why people shop secondhand clothing is because they don't want to contribute demand to like child labor and unsafe work conditions of some of the fast fashion industry, but also why people buy like women-owned, like products from women-owned businesses, is they want to contribute demand to those industries. So you can look at your individual purchases as carrying their own positive and negative externalities.
That is a great example. And I think within foundations philanthropy, there's a lot more focus right now on BIPOC-led businesses, on veteran-owned businesses, on whether it's a disability-owned business owner. There's a ton of examples of that. So thank you. Any other individual examples?
Yeah, like at COVID that affected the manufacturing globally. And also on top of that, the political climate.
Do you mind saying a little more about political climate?
Yeah, I mean, a simple example is how like all countries are blaming each other, and they just refuse to collaborate, which made not only just the public health situation is a hot mess, but also like the whole global economy now is like falling into pieces.
Such a thank you. I appreciate that. I heard it explained once that our politicians, a disadvantage, whether it's local, state, or national, in the sense that their duty is to advocate or support their constituents. And so whether we're looking at this locally or nationally, the fact that oftentimes we're seeing these more nationalistic policies because they're trying to do what they think in the short term is best for constituents, when the biggest issues we have today are global concerns. So whether we're talking about environment, whether we're talking about global health right now, I think it's just so important to acknowledge essentially the incentive structure that we've created, and how they're engaging in those activities versus what we as consumers are buying goods globally. We're traveling globally. We're working for organizations that represent global interests. So it's really a stacked deck in that sense. Any other examples?
I feel like I would say like property prices with this. For like positive would be like the borough or town puts a public park down the street, or negative, like maybe they put a sewage treatment plant down the street.
And along with property prices is taxes. That's another, it's a whole separate conversation. But we could get into essentially how property and taxes are tied to, cultivating economic growth for those communities. Any other examples? I'm fishing here for a couple that Greg and I had just talked about prior, and I'm surprised they haven't come up yet. Yeah, Leah talked about a really important topic in terms of race-neutral policies. I think that's something that is permeating both kind of our public institutions as well as private, corporate. Ian, do you mind saying a little more about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things, probably the only thing that's keeping capitalism going to this day and age is the innovation that follows it, I guess. I don't know. I just kind of I've heard about this in my classes, and like you were saying earlier with the R&D and how the vaccine for COVID is an externality of R&D. Kind of the same thing with capitalism, where the latest iPhone is an externality of Apple's search for profits. I don't know.
Yeah, the easiest way to distill that concept, I think, down is the fact that capitalism is successful with the assumption of growth. When we live in a world now where we're already overpopulated and we know we're not sustainable, how do we continue to have growth broadly? And then you can, kind of pare down into individual markets. But I think that is definitely a hurdle or going to be a challenge broadly for the market. Other individual examples that we had talked about, traditionally, I feel like with externalities, you hear about carbon. You hear about water pollution. You hear about soil degradation. You hear about overfishing. Those are all examples of externalities that businesses, that individuals are not essentially tasked with trying to solve. And so it really is coming up to social organizations that are taking initiatives that are working to incorporate those. And then what you're seeing more often is collectives of organizations coming together, of constituents saying, hey, we want to make this entire market better. So we are not going to compete, when it comes to whether it's child labor or we talked about overfishing. That was one of our examples from a organization earlier this semester. So would anyone be willing to talk through how could we how could we solve or think through a particular example? What are, just at a very high level, what are potential solutions?
One big one on the pollution aspect is regulations, whether that's forms of capping it or just having, just regulating in general is a start.
Absolutely. Anyone else with anything more to say on that piece?
Something that's difficult with externalities is they aren't necessarily quantifiable. So when you have the price of something, that price does not include any positive or negative externalities in it. So using things like regulations and making quantifiable ways to account for those can help influence prices, and prices directly can influence like buyer behavior and seller behavior. So one of the regulations is like, I think a carbon tax is a way to quantify a negative externality. And that usually has a bit more success in the capitalist markets than other things.
Not going to be able to write as fast as I'd like. I think that's a really important example. What you're seeing in the automotive industry are more often than not, organizations are creating credits. If you're familiar with high efficiency vehicles. And so organizations that are essentially not producing those vehicles, just like we're talking about regulating pollution and then having to pay potentially a carbon tax would be an example in that segment. With automobiles, you would potentially, in order to stay in the clear, you would have to buy credits from other organizations that are overproducing in high efficiency vehicles. I think those type of examples, but also acknowledging the complexity around that in terms of getting all industry constituents to buy into that process, are going to be really interesting to see how it unfolds in the next 10, 20 years. I put it at the end of the day in homework, it's optional, but if you have Netflix, I really encourage, related to this topic, is watching the episode on the world's water crisis. I think it really talks through not only that externality, but also what potential solutions look like and how communities are attempting to pilot solutions. So I do want to pause quick before we are going to have a guest speaker that's going to be joining us just before 11. So if we could plan to all be back here, I would say by 10:55, and then we'll get started again. Thank you, everyone.
To speak to everybody. It's good to meet everybody as well. And yeah, excited for your questions. I did put together a couple of slides. Is it okay can I share my screen? I can. So I did put together a brief deck for us to review. Sorry, give me just a second here. And yeah, I mean, feel free to interrupt me at any point in time if you have any questions, but this is pretty short, so I plan on going through it quickly, and we'll leave time at the end for questions as well. Just before we get started, Matt, did we have a certain amount of time allotted for this?
Yeah, so we have until 11:30 today. So if you want to roughly, half Q&A, half going through kind of your story and experience of Breathe 99.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. So hi, everybody. Again, my name is Max. I'm an engineer and a designer, and sort of by happenstance, a founder. It was definitely not something I necessarily set out to do, but happened as a result of my interest and my curiosity, and always sort of tinkering and working on problems in my spare time. I'm actually from Minneapolis originally, but I am a Badger, so don't hold that against me. So yeah, just really quickly, we'll go over the timeline of how Breathe 99 even came to be, some lessons learned, a couple of next steps, and where we are right now with as we see a light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic. And then I'll leave the rest of the time open for questions. So my journey with respiratory health, broadly speaking, started in 2013. I was studying and living in Singapore at the time. And it was the first time I'd ever been in an environment where, it made me consider the fact that breathing clean air is a privilege. I'd always been, if people are here from the Midwest, you don't really think about the air that you breathe, or you probably didn't until COVID happened. And so I sort of had that experience in Singapore, and I was taking an air pollution engineering course at the time. And so I was learning about how cloth and surgical masks don't really do a lot to protect the wearer. And I couldn't find a comfortable and protective and good looking mask. They just didn't exist at the time. And so it was in going back to Madison in 2014, I started working on making a better lightweight respirator. And I entered it into a design competition in that spring semester. And I ended up getting second place and winning about $8,000. And although I didn't like jump into it right away, I had some things come up in my personal life at the time and didn't necessarily start running with it right away. But that was the first indication that maybe there was something worthwhile in pursuing the idea. And so one lesson there maybe is that if there are opportunities available at the university, definitely take them, because they're available. They're only available to you now in most cases. Although we're very fortunate here in Minnesota to have the Minnesota Cup, which is available to everybody, even non-students as well. So like I said, I took a little bit of time off to focus on my early career and some stuff that was happening with my family, and but got reinterested in this in 2017. And I asked two friends to help co-found the business with me, and so we built an early website, and we pushed the designs for an early version of what was the B1 mask at the time forward. And in 2018, I traveled to China and was in China for about 3 weeks and was doing user research with people, and giving them early versions of the mask, asking them to try it on. And I was working with a friend and design researcher at the time to help me conduct these interviews. And so it was during this time that I also incorporated the business, and we're able to raise a small friends and family round at the time as well. So if you have any questions about how to go about raising that first sort of small round of capital, I'm definitely open to any questions in that regard as well. And it was with that friends and family round that in 2019, we pushed the design forward. Again, the whole time I'm working full time as a design engineer in the med device space. And so I'm sort of moonlighting on Breathe 99. But we were pushing the designs forward. And in August of 2019, we launched our first Kickstarter. And we did not meet our funding goal for that. Our funding goal was $90,000, and we ended up generating about $30,000 in pre-orders. So we definitely failed to meet our goal, and it was a humbling experience. And we learned a lot about what not to do, and also ways in which we could have improved that initial Kickstarter as well. So like a really good example is have a really clear idea of what your marketing strategy is as it relates to launching a crowdfunding campaign. I mean, if PR and media if you intend for that to be a big part of your strategy in raising awareness, you want to have those people want the scoop on your project, right? And so you need to be reaching out to them at least a month in advance to get them to write about you. And that's something that we didn't even consider until a couple of days before the Kickstarter. And at that point, it was too late. So there are definitely a lot of hard-earned lessons there. And we were pretty much out of money after that Kickstarter, and we were sort of wayfinding and trying to figure out what the next steps were. But we're even considering closing the business in like December 2019, January 2020. And that's when, because of the industry we're in, we first started hearing about COVID-19 probably in like the second, maybe third week of January. And yeah, we ended up launching a Kickstarter we did change the design a little bit, so we had to pivot slightly. And there are implications for that now, especially as we think about post-COVID markets. But yeah, we took the exhalation valves out of the mask, which proved to be a good idea. And we relaunched our Kickstarter with a more public health oriented brand. It was less style oriented because that felt a little bit tone deaf given the grave uncertainty and sort of fright around the pandemic during those early days. And so through that Kickstarter and then the following Indiegogo, we generated $750,000 in pre-orders. And we ended up fulfilling all of those pre-orders by the first week of September. So we moved really, really quickly from having a functioning prototype to delivering product to our backers. There were a lot of challenges on the supply chain side throughout that process. So yeah, we ended up electing to work entirely domestically just because there was so much uncertainty. And so if anybody here is considering starting a business that has a physical product as part of your product line, we'd be happy to answer any questions about manufacturing, manufacturing processes, supply chain questions, anything like that as well. But we were able to navigate all of that, fortunately, and we did, for the most part, have good partnerships through that process. And so things really opened up for us when we were named one of Time's Best Inventions of 2020. So that happened at the end of November. And we saw a really big increase in sales throughout the month of December. But one of the things that was interesting about that is it was less a result of the Time article itself, and it was more the local coverage of the Time article that actually generated the most web traffic and most web sales. So there's definitely a lesson there about how to take the most advantage of any sort of earned media that you do get. And so at this point, so we finished 2020 with about $1.3 million in sales, and we shipped close to 20,000 masks. And the whole time we've been learning a lot from our customers and working to improve our product. And at this point, we are kind of, we, like everybody else, are really eager for the pandemic to sort of subside, get back to a little bit more of a normal life. But we want to make sure that we're continuing to build solutions that provide better protection, not just better protection, but also better awareness for people as well, and sort of identifying what the jobs, pains, and gains are for consumers as we move into this post-COVID world, and people now have sort of a greater awareness of how masks can help protect them, not just from infectious diseases, but other airborne contaminants as well. So there's definitely a chapter is closing for us right now. There's a decent amount of uncertainty about what the next chapter might look like. And yeah, there's obviously a lot of stress and anxiety associated with that, but also that's part of what building a business is adapting to the changing landscape and proving resilient through that. So with that, I just wanted to show a couple of images. So this is, I probably should have showed this initially, but this is the B2 mask. It's a lightweight reusable respirator. It features small disposable filters, so it can provide it provides N95 level protection, but in a much more sustainable design that results in a lower total cost of ownership over time because our filters are much more affordable and scalable than N95s. It's a platform of sorts, and we designed it specifically with consumers in a lifestyle context in mind. So we are offering a range of different overlays that can provide people, different performance parameters, but also the opportunity to self-express in different ways. And so this one right here is our latest. It's actually a 3D knitting process that's the same as Nike Flyknit's manufacturing process. So it's much more sustainable. It's made from 70% recycled bottles, and we're actually making a transition to this overlay away from the original sort of mesh-like overlay. As I mentioned, everything is produced here in the States, sourced, produced, and assembled here in the States. And the majority of our manufacturing partners are actually in the Twin Cities area. So again, if you have any questions about manufacturing at all, I'm happy to answer those. Yeah, and like I mentioned, I mean, like the use cases and the intended use for our product is actually going to start transitioning back to how we had originally been conceptualizing the product. And so what we're focused on now is how to build out a service around the mask that makes it easier and more understandable for people who are more vulnerable to use and to use well to get the most beneficial sort of like public health impacts from using these types of products. So these are in cases like wildfire smoke or ambient air pollution just in urban environments as well. So we're starting to build out some of this additional technology. And then just last thing to say, super high level, big lessons, and I'm happy to drill into any of these more, is test frequently, and especially with people you don't know. There are a number of flaws in our first product, things that we overlooked, maybe because we were trying to move quickly to get the product to market, but also when we did test it, we were giving it to people that we knew, who were maybe a little bit more kind to us in their feedback. And so that resulted in a number of aspects of the product that weren't as good as they could have been when we launched broadly to everybody. So we definitely heard a lot of critiques, and you want to listen to that as well, and then iterate and continue to iterate, but test often, and especially with people you don't know. Fundraise even when you don't think you need to. And also another thing that I've learned is fundraising is really sort of, it's about relationships. So even if you aren't fundraising, but you're having conversations with investors and just keeping them up to date, like they might not invest in you for a year or 2 years, but that's sort of an ongoing process, and it takes a lot longer than you would expect. So I would always set aside, consider that it'll take about 6 months to close a round of funding, potentially. The third one is definitely understand, like pick the right partners and understand what the capabilities or lack thereof of your partners are. So probably one of the biggest fumbles that we had on the supply chain side was the group that we ended up working with for the fabric overlay portion of our product. That first partner just wasn't the right fit for us, and it resulted in a number of unhappy customers because of delays and because of product quality considerations and different things like that. Also design issues that were on our part as well. But part of that has to do with who you pick as your partners. But to that point, segueing to the fourth one is like when you do make mistakes, especially if you're launching via Kickstarter or more in like a community type way, is like, it's much, much better to say, hey, we made a mistake. Here's what the mistake was, and just own it and do it publicly and get out in front of it. So we had to do that a number of times throughout our Kickstarter as it related to miscommunications on our part or delays, things like that. Is just like, just own your mistakes and be honest with people. And most of the time they'll forgive you. Not always though, the internet's a wild place. And the last one is, for me at least, is just understand at a deep level, like why you're even doing this. And it's okay, by the way, if like your why for a particular endeavor is to make money, that's fine. But just understanding that that's the case, sort of accepting that that's what your why is, or if your why is something impact oriented, whatever it might be, just understanding what that is, because having a deep understanding of that and the values that drive your efforts will help you. You can always revisit those as you're making tough decisions within your business, and sort of connecting the dots from where you want to be and where you are right now. So that's everything that I had. I don't know how long. Oh, there we go. 15 minutes. So with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Hey, Max, just first and foremost, thank you for the presentation, super informative. My question for you is, you talked about how you almost gave up, you kind of looked your alternative options in the eye. Can you just elaborate on why you kept on going and why you decide to continue to pursue the project?
Yeah. Well, I'd be lying to you if I said that continuing forward was always always an obvious choice. And there were many times in which like I had sort of mentally like was already going through the process of like, okay, like, you know, it's okay to quit. And maybe it is time to sort of like wrap it up, so to speak. And I think had the pandemic not happened, we would have closed the business, and I would have, I probably would have focused on my career, like just on my professional career, and then find something else to work on. But with what happened with the pandemic, like I wasn't able to immediately make that transition to like, okay, I'm going full tilt. Like I'm really going to dive into this. I'm going to quit my job. Like that took probably a month and a half between when I found out that the pandemic was like sort of in the early stages and when I quit my job like March 16th or something like that. And I'll be honest, it was sort of like this acknowledgement that the pain, like I felt like a sort of this pain and anxiety associated with like having already kind of mentally gotten to this place where I was so beaten down and exhausted that I didn't know how to continue or if I even wanted to continue. But there was I just knew, I sort of fast forwarded like 10 years. And the way that I was able to switch for myself was to say, I want to minimize my regrets in this moment. And I have something that could potentially really help people right now. And this pandemic won't go away. I'll continue to feel this anxiety and this stress with not moving forward. And so the only way is to like push through the pain and the uncertainty to know for myself that I'm doing everything that I can to help during a moment of crisis. So that was, I don't know that there's necessarily a direct answer there or not, but that was kind of the process.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I was sort of curious about like how you were able to come up with pricing. Like I'd imagine there's probably some like ethical conflicts there with trying to help the most like number of people versus maximizing profits. Like what did that process look like?
It's a great question. So we founded in April of 2020, we reincorporated as a public benefit corporation. And we raised $130,000 from the Venn Foundation, which is actually It's a nonprofit based out of the University of Minnesota that helps social impact businesses or even nonprofits raise their first round of capital to pursue impact-oriented initiatives. So we made a pretty conscious decision before like really diving back in that we were going to be sort of like a double bottom line type business. And so we, it is a balance though, right? Because you need to, and sort of a philosophical, from a philosophical perspective, like I believe that a business's purpose is to achieve its impact, or sort of its purpose, for why the founder started the business. But that in order to do that in a profound way, you need to be profitable. So it's less like achieve profit for the sake of profit, but more about like being a profitable business so that you can have the public benefit or the impact that really motivates you. Because at the end of the day, like, especially when things get tough, it's like, that's like why that fifth lesson was like, understand your why. So we've definitely had to play around with price a number of times. We were hoping to price the product at $49 initially, and we had just our development costs ended up being too high, and we had to price it up to $59 in order to have a higher margin. And now what we're doing is saying, okay, how do we price the product down to make it more accessible and to do a better job of achieving our public benefit oriented goals? And so we're doing price testing on on a $49 price point and a $39 price point, and we're doing everything that we can to cost down the product in order to do that. So I don't know if that necessarily explains like how to balance. I don't know if I actually know the answer to like how to balance it. It's sort of, those are two things that you just need to weigh as you go through your business. But again, going back to understanding your why, like if you have a good grasp on that, it'll help you make decisions.
I guess just asking that same question from a different position, you talked about the need of identifying good partners. You talked about the intentionality of working with Venn, and you really surrounded yourself with some leaders in terms of that double bottom line, triple bottom line mindset. How have they helped, I guess, continue to influence you and think beyond, short-term cash flows, but not only a sustainable business, but also the conscientiousness of, impact?
Yeah, well, Venn has been instrumental, and it's not just the Venn Foundation, right? Because the way that their investment vehicles work is they use an instrument called a PRI, a program-related investment, and so it's actually a coalition of philanthropic donors that come together to help back these businesses like ours, and so we now have we have a cohort of people who care about businesses that are trying to make change in that way. And so I can't stress how, and we've avoided investment from people whose values don't align in that way. So, but at the same time, like they want the businesses that they invest in to be sustainable, from a cash flow perspective and a profit perspective as well, because you can't achieve that public benefit if you aren't doing that. So it's just been good to have those mentors in our corner who have been able to help us understand like some of the challenges associated with even implementing a model like this. So a good example is like we started with the idea of doing a 1-for-1 model where we were going to donate one mask for every one that we sold in order to try and achieve like this idea of making better public health goods accessible to all. And Venn was able to help us understand that model in more detail and what it takes to actually execute on that model in a successful way. And it became clear to us pretty quickly, especially with all the supply chain challenges that we encountered at the beginning of the pandemic and all the additional development costs, that we just weren't going to be able to execute on that in the short term. So we've still donated, hundreds of masks, but it's not to the same degree that we were hoping. And Venn and partners like Venn have been able to like sort of guide us in this way where it's like, you won't be able to do everything that you want to do right away. And that's okay. Like, understand where you want to go, but you might not be able to achieve everything that you're hoping to achieve all at once. And I think that that was actually one of the things that we did poorly, or I did poorly specifically in the first Kickstarters. We were trying to do too many things all at once. So.
Hi, Max. I have a question. So I would assume your design hasn't been patented, right? Given it's so new. So like, what ways have you like utilized to protect your design?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the design actually is patent pending. This is, I think, reflective of the fact that I had been working on it for a couple of years beforehand. So we had that first mover advantage in a way. So this is the mask right here. And the patent is mostly, the utility patent is mostly around the fact that it can fold in half. So it's the first elastomeric respirator that can fold, which is really, really important when you're being specific about your targeting, right? Because we have been thinking about this in terms of a daily commuter who lives in a polluted place. Like, portability is a really important aspect of that. From a value proposition design perspective, is really, really relevant, right? So that's what our protection relates to. I will also say that somebody could buy our mask right now. They could they could reverse engineer it and start molding it. And we obviously don't have we don't have very much money to do anything about that, right? So the other two, I'll call them maybe competitive moats right now, at least as being a small company, is that we have like really loyal, like the people who have bought our products are like, we have a very engaged customer base. And so that will help us as we continue to grow. And then the second thing is that it's not cheap to buy the, here, I'll just take this off. It's really not cheap to buy the injection molding tooling that's responsible for actually molding this. Like, so to give you a frame of reference, like all in the tooling associated with the 4 components that make this up, it probably like $120,000. So there is a cost barrier to entry as well. That's not to say that somebody couldn't just go ahead and spend $120,000 and try and knock us off, but those are also like, that's sort of like a, if somebody knocks us off, I'll take it as a huge compliment, frankly. Like, it means we're doing something right. I don't know that we're necessarily at that stage yet, that needs to be a primary concern.
Thank you. So I, as a consumer, I've been using IQ Air mask, and it kind of, it floats too. And it's also a 95. So I wonder, like, what's the benefit of me choosing your mask instead of IQ Air? Plus, it's like, I can't remember the price I paid, but somewhere around like $50 for 10 or 5 or something like that.
Yeah, so the IQ Air is still a disposable though, right?
It is, but it's not dedicated for COVID. It's been around for a long time. It's for air pollution. So you can use it multiple times, but eventually you have to use a new one.
Right. Yeah, so there's 2 things. I mean, the first is that we've really tried to emphasize like the the customization and the modularity that's available, and the style, like sort of the style element of the fabric overlay to give, which is something that, especially for consumers in the States or in Europe, where masking was much less prevalent before COVID, that's really important for adoption in a consumer context, is like giving people the option to like wear something that sort of blends a little bit more naturally into their lifestyle, and that they can style with their clothes and things like that. And I mean, the other thing is that you said you paid $50 for about 10 masks.
I can't remember the exact price, but it was something like $50 to $100. Can't remember.
Sure. So there's just a cost, like, so I would encourage the way that we've been thinking about it is from a total cost of ownership perspective. So you're paying $52, or let's just say it's $50 for argument's sake, for 10 masks. You use each mask for maybe a month or something like that, multiple times. But then at the end of that month, you switch your mask, and now at 5 months in, you need to pay another $50 to get the same pack. Whereas with ours, currently it's priced at $60, but your filter refills, and it comes with enough filter refills for the same circumstance, 5 months of protection, and then your refill pack will be $8.99. So this is something where it's like, if you live in an environment where there's episodic air pollution, it's something that happens seasonally, and you know you're going to need regular protection for years, the total cost of ownership for a product like ours and the waste associated with a product like ours is substantially lower than something like Air IQ.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Max, I really appreciate the time today. I do want to be cognizant of both your time in the class. If you would be willing to put LinkedIn or contact information, as students do have questions and just want to be able to follow the work of Breathe 99, I think it's really incredible to see what you're doing in the marketplace. It's exciting, the early notoriety. And I know the best is yet to come still for the organization.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. Do you want me to just send you my contact after this?
Yeah, that'd be fine. And I can follow up and share that with class. Have a great day. For everyone else, I will just close by talking about kind of our homework. And then question of the day is, what externalities is your organization, the service learning organization you're working with, looking to incorporate into their work? Reminder that we have project updates for those of you that are completing this Thursday. And then, as we talked about as well, related to externalities, feel free to check out Netflix, the documentary series called Explained, specifically the second episode on the world's water crisis. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.